The Secret of the Plumed Serpent. Further Conversations with Carlos Castaneda. I dedicate this book to those who know intent. Forward. Living a Myth by Juan Yolilitzli. The devil worked his ex-sacraments, using unrecognizable things foul to eat. Perhaps he used some moving forms, like savage beasts or strange birds, hard to identify, not commonly found. Perilous is his word, duplicitous, dark. Friar Andres de Olmos, Treatise on Witchcraft and Sorcery, 1536. Despite the fact that during the conquest of Mexico, the Spaniards were able to witness astonishing acts of physical transformation among the natives, and what is more, the evidence of such events still exists and can be seen recorded in sculptures and murals in various Mexican churches. They did not know how to take advantage of the great opportunity for studying a different culture or exploring new possibilities of perception they had been presented with. Instead, they labeled such acts devil's works, for which reason they hunted and killed the indigenous population. The reason they soon forgot, because their eyes were focused on the yellow metal the natives despised, since they had far greater treasure at hand, the knowledge of a vast, magical world. Today, modern researchers, brilliant scientists, struggle to unravel the mysteries of the universe. To that end, they build ever more complex and sophisticated spaceships. They do it in full knowledge that, try as they might, they will never be able to traverse enormous physical distances of billions of light years, the real barriers that separate us from other celestial bodies. And the saddest thing is that, were they ever to overcome those barriers, they would probably treat the other races they might find in space the same way the conquistadors treated Native Americans. It must never be forgotten. All Europeans and their descendants owe them a heavy debt. Alternative researchers, however, did exist, taking a different route towards deciphering the mysteries of the universe and claiming to have solved, in a practical manner, the question of time and space. Their heirs are the modern sorcerers, who, instead of trying to handle things through physics, as scientists do, focus their efforts on understanding and manipulating energy, a discipline not yet to be found at our universities. By applying this knowledge, sorcerers travel freely through the universe in an eye blink, regardless of distance, measuring the cost of their journey not in gallons of fuel, but rather in intensity of attention. They stress that the secret lies in the manipulation of awareness, where everything reduces to energy. Starting from that premise, they venture out to explore the unknown. What would have happened if those Europeans of 500 years ago had taken the opportunity presented to them instead of focusing on conquest and destruction? We shall never know. Perhaps by now, 5 centuries later, the human race would already be a frequent traveler through the cosmos. The man of reason walks towards his extinction. His egomania, born of self-importance and self-pity, drives Homo sapiens, or Homo reasonabilis, toward his end. In his place, a new race will appear, the Homo perceptibilis. They will be magical beings traveling freely across the dark sea of awareness. I can see the rise of a new world, where magic and technology coexist in perfect harmony. In this book, Armando Torres gives us a wonderful description of his apprenticeship with a group of healers from Mexico who adopted him as assistant. His account shows clearly that the reality we perceive depends entirely on the focus of our attention. By the same token, the myths of the sorcerers, even though it looks like nonsense to the Western man, indeed represents a different description of the world. From that point of view, if a researcher wants results, the practices he adopts to reach his goal are not all that important. What matters is that they work. The myth of the sorcerers is thus not a lie as the word suggests, but rather an alternative representation of reality. The sorcerer's descriptions, maintained by the will of those powerful men of long ago, are still valid today. They apply them in their daily lives in a practical way. And, according to them, those descriptions work as well as our own descriptions based on reason. When describing his world, modern man does it in such a methodical and detailed way that it does not leave him even a tiny crack through which to escape. Hence his feeling of being hemmed in, having no peace and no way out. This inevitability generates a great amount of depression. The result is mankind's terrible destructive state. What modern man needs is to return to dreaming, dreams of power and magic. I have heard many speculations about whether or not Carlos Castaneda achieved his goal. People ask me rather frequently, do you believe that Carlos Castaneda reached freedom? Of course he did. Like Calixto Muni, he was victorious in battle. Carlos has successfully made his somersault of thought into infinity and is free. No one could put chains on thought. That is the great trick of the sorcerers. In this work, Armando provides us with the tools to break free from our chains of rationality. He draws open the curtains of the other world, and by revealing the myth of sorcerer healers, gives us a new description. He shows us a reality outside our modern description, a reality that is still very much alive in Mexican rural communities. At this point, I think it is fair to warn the reader of the need to suspend judgment and approach this matter with an open mind and an attitude of genuine inquiry. Armando invites us to enter a magical world where our wildest fantasies can indeed become reality. He shows us that the experiences of the sorcerers are available to anyone. It is simply a question of opening up to it. As for me, this work leaves me with a strange taste in my mouth. I realize that on the whole, we are unaware of our potential as human beings. And bearing in mind Armando's repeated denials, I, like everyone else, did not expect a new book from him. This book, then, came as a great surprise and delight, and I hope you will enjoy it as much as I did. JY. Introduction. My name is Armando Torres, and this is the record of my experiences during my involvement with the group of sorcerers healers of Sierra Madre Oriental in Mexico. The person responsible for starting me on this path was the famous anthropologist Carlos Castaneda, author of a dozen best-selling books which recount his own odyssey of learning the art of sorcery. In his books, Carlos tells us how he, in the course of his field studies, came into contact with a powerful Yaqui Indian shaman from northern Mexico by the name of Don Juan Matas. For 13 years, Carlos dedicated himself to exploring the magical world which Don Juan, aided by his peers, introduced him to. The first contacts Carlos had with his mentor Don Juan appeared to be an ordinary encounter with a herbalist sorcerer who, like many others, used hallucinogenic plants to induce an altered state of consciousness in his apprentice. Yet their relationship turned out to be of an entirely different nature. Carlos developed a twofold relationship with Don Juan. On one hand, in his normal state of awareness, he treated Don Juan and his cohorts as his native informants. On the other hand, in states of heightened awareness, he received from them important information as a sorcerer's apprentice. From his fifth book onwards, The Second Ring of Power, covering the events immediately following the departure of Don Juan and his party, Carlos's stories take an unexpected turn as he begins to remember all that he had experienced in heightened awareness. In that unusual state of awareness, Carlos discovered that his teacher was not an ordinary sorcerer doing whatever ordinary sorcerers did, but belonged instead to a long tradition of practitioners whose origins dated back to antiquity. Carlos also learned that Don Juan was the leader, or Nahual, of a group of sorcerers who were pursuing the abstract goal of total freedom. The ability to guide an apprentice in the state of heightened awareness is one of the elementary requirements in the training of new warriors in sorcerers' parties. This state is achieved by moving the disciple's assemblage point to new areas of his luminosity. The result of those changes is very similar to what happens when power plants are used. However, manipulating apprentices' attention simply by intending the movement of their assemblage points allows for a greater control and a much longer duration of those induced states that can be achieved by using power plants. Heightened awareness has been described in many ways. The best explanation, perhaps, requires that we consider ourselves as having an assemblage point. According to the sorcerers, seers, the assemblage point is our center of perception. It is perceived as if it were a luminous magnet within the energy field that surrounds the physical body, at the level of the shoulder blades and approximately at an arm's length behind them. Sorcerers learn to manipulate the position of the assemblage point. Through experimentation, they saw that it could be manipulated in different ways, and moreover, that one could manipulate the assemblage points of others. Sorcerers discovered that regardless of where they moved the assemblage point to, it would always be to a new area. They saw that this feature could be used as the key element in teaching apprentices, because it had the benefit of giving the persons who experienced it unlimited concentration on the task at hand. Masters therefore utilized this maneuver in order to teach, since whatever students learn in any alternative state of awareness becomes integrated within the recipient in latent form. Typically, instruction received in those altered states transforms into a perceptual block of great intensity, presenting a serious obstacle to the recollection of past events. Stored in an area of our total being that is not the brain, instruction received in those episodes of altered awareness is then forgotten. It is as if the apprentice had been put into a deep state of hypnosis while being taught, only to remember everything that had happened at a later stage, in a special situation or following a key word similar to a post-hypnotic command. Trying to remember heightened awareness is like trying to remember a dream. The more you consciously put your brain to the task, the more elusive the memory gets. To remember that kind of experience, it is necessary to accumulate enough energy. Trying to use the linear mind to recover those memories will not avail us. Only energy will move our assemblage point in order to realign it in the same position it occupied in the moment when the experience we're trying to remember took place. It was in that special state of awareness that Carlos learned firsthand the mysteries of sorcery. He became aware that everything was energy and that it was possible to control and use that energy. Sorcerers have been in possession of this knowledge for thousands of years. They have been passing their knowledge on from generation to generation to individuals selected by the same impersonal, inexplicable force that shapes the universe. For the ordinary man, the nature and the acts of sorcerers are incomprehensible. The acts of seers defy reason. Because of that, they have, in the course of history, acquired the reputation of possessing special powers and supernatural control over other people. The sorcerer's powers were commonly associated with the intervention of evil spirits. As a young student of anthropology, Carlos received a strange system of knowledge and became involved in sorcerer's training without being fully aware of what he had gotten himself into. He discovered that sorcery, far from being an absurd set of practices, spells, and incantations, actually was a very ancient philosophy of life implemented by extremely disciplined practitioners. By linking his fate to the Nahual's party, Carlos learned that Don Juan and his companions were the last of a lineage of ancestral knowledge that had flourished for thousands of years in what is now Mexico and parts of Central America. A unique culture of people passionately dedicated to discovering the secret of existence. They were known as Toltecs. Toltec is the name given to anyone practicing the arts that lead to knowledge. Toltec's tasks relate to investigations in the field of self-control, the awareness of being, and the manipulation of inorganic beings they call allies. Even today, scattered all over Mexico, descendants of those ancient lineages follow the path and practices of their ancestors. The sorcerers, healers, to whose tradition I belong, are one such group, and that is what this book is about. Performing my mandatory tasks as assistant, I have managed, by and large, to corroborate many of the challenges that Carlos had overcome. And whilst I am still in the phase of recollecting my past experiences, I have lost the human form and have managed to complete my dreaming body. This, for me, has opened the doors to an extraordinary world. In the initial stage of his apprenticeship, Carlos faithfully followed tradition and remained totally inaccessible to the outside world. He did not receive anyone and did not even grant interviews to promote his books. Over the time, however, he opened up little by little, first agreeing to conduct private meetings and later giving public lectures. I was fortunate to be able to assist him with several of those events. I also spoke with him privately on a number of occasions, using those opportunities to clarify my doubts. I remember how, at the beginning of my apprenticeship, I thought I had everything under control. I had already decided my future. My goal was to finish my chosen professional training, then find a job and start a family. I was at the time engaged to a beautiful girl. We loved each other and wanted to get married. When I told Carlos of my plans, he talked me out of the idea and helped me realize that there was more to life than to be born, to breed, and to die. You still haven't considered all your options, he said. You are simply acting in a mechanical way as you have been programmed to. What we all tend to do is repeat our parents' lives over and over again, not realizing that there are other options open to us. That is how it was with me. What I wanted most was to have a family, and I believed I could not survive without one. Don Juan got me out of all that. And look at me now, still here, alive and kicking. Our biological imperative is not the only reason we want to form families. Our hidden motives have to do with the fear of being alone and with the selfish and cowardly concern for who will take care of poor little me. During our very first encounter, Carlos warned me that his energy would not let him accept disciples. Our relationship could thus not in any sense be of the conventional master apprentice type. Rather, he was like a good friend to me, and we talked together intimately like brothers. Imitating the accent of a northerner, Carlos once told me, "You'll have to scratch your own back, dude. You must take responsibility for your own path, because from my point of view, there is no other way out for you. Like I told you, I cannot take on apprentices. My energy will not let me. All I can do is point out a direction, and you will either follow up or you will not." He added sorrowfully, "I have unsuccessfully tried to reach people and imbue them with the sense of urgency I got from Don Juan. The fact is, nobody takes me seriously." I thought Carlos was referring to me and began reassuring him that I did take him seriously, but he interrupted me with a gesture. "You don't need to explain yourself. Only time will tell whether or not you're able to follow the direction I have indicated to you." The direction Carlos was referring to unexpectedly revealed itself years later, when, as was my good fortune, he ended up introducing me to the healers. For that, I owe him a debt of gratitude I can never repay. It is undoubtedly the greatest gift anyone has given me in my entire life. My relationship with him had been atypical from start, because as he told me later, he had received a sign from the Spirit and had consequently chosen me as the bearer of the rule of the three-pronged Nawal. Carlos warned me that I should not disclose it until 4 years after his departure, to allow myself the time to organize the material he had given me. Preparing and publishing this material, I not only faced the challenge of expressing the rule in writing, but also of synthesizing on a few pages all that I experienced with Carlos. During my work, I sank into a deep state of recapitulation and dreaming, and thus managed to relive my hidden memories. The final result was the book, Encounters with the Nawal. Castaneda used a journalistic literary style that made his books feel like reportages. In this work, I have opted for the narrative form and for story to present my account. The advantage of using this format was that it allowed me more latitude in the handling of words and ideas. I must, however, point out that my choosing this particular writing style does not mean that what I describe is unreal. On the path of knowledge, I have experienced things so extraordinary that, were I to lecture about them ex cathedra, I would be ridiculed and labeled a liar or a madman by those who know nothing of such things, just as it happened repeatedly to Carlos Castaneda. Sorcerers are usually very reluctant to talk about their knowledge because they know that their words sometimes appear to be contradictory. Explaining sorcery is never an easy task, mainly because people don't have the energy to understand and to see the point of exploring sorcerers' achievements as possibilities, and refuse to believe what they are told. Consequently, sorcerers occasionally resort to fable and metaphor as devices to help them explain their knowledge. That is why some people felt resentful when they discovered that Carlos had been giving them conflicting information about himself and his personal history. The old saying, "You notice an ant while an elephant passes you by," applies to people who get trapped in the details of Carlos's stories and his description of events while missing the most important bit, the message. Initially, I too could not really comprehend what the grandparents were referring to when they spoke of their knowledge. The terms they used did not translate exactly into our modern idiom. My first impulse was thus to reject all the mystical religious gibberish I considered to be the superstition of ignorant folk. What stopped me from judging them too harshly was the ready translatability of the concepts they were trying to teach me into the terminology used by Castaneda. Only thanks to what I learned from Carlos was I able to understand the explanations of the healers. Since I could say, strictly speaking, that I was the product of two teachings, that of the healers on one hand and that of Carlos Castaneda on the other, it was inevitable that I should occasionally combine the two terminologies. I confess, however, that I made a special effort for the benefit of the readers to make this work more consistent with the Nahualistic vocabulary used in Carlos's books. I have found, in fact, that the goal of both those paths is the same. The only real difference between the two lies in the type of stalking applied to the description of the world, and, in the healer's case, the use of certain novel procedures that are actually very effective. When a sorcerer passes his knowledge on to a novice, his heir is said to be his child, or it is said that the sorcerer has made a child. In that sense, Carlos has made millions of potential children throughout the world by making his teacher's tradition public in his books. His true legacy to future generations is the challenge of transcending the level of simply being a reader by personally experiencing the mysteries discovered by the sorcerers. The intense work to which I am committed demands that I stay away from all superfluous social relationships which only seek to inflate the ego. Heeding the Nawal's warning, and in order to avoid repeating mistakes that could cost me my life and my freedom, I decided to share my experiences whilst keeping myself at distance, participating, yet staying apart. I propose to tell my stories in the hope that perhaps they might be of use to those who read them. I have devoted a large part of my life to my purpose, and it would be disastrous to lose now, through recklessness, all that I have worked so hard to accomplish. I therefore hope to be excused my aloofness, as I am committed to work that transcends me. I bring this book forth because of a series of omens I found very hard to understand. The problem was that I had previously decided not to publish anything beyond what I had already disclosed. I consequently failed to grasp the full implications of the indications the Spirit had provided, believing that the omens I saw had to do only with my immediate environment. I later realized it was not so, and I'm therefore sharing what I experienced in the world of the healers. Part 1. Awakening Intent. Baiting Intent. On that day, we met by the Palace of Fine Arts in Mexico City. Carlos told me he was looking for some rare books and asked me to accompany him to secondhand bookshops. We crossed the park and walked in silence through the streets of the historic center in the direction of the Zocalo. He entered all secondhand bookshops along the way, but in the end did not buy anything. I don't normally have private conversations with people, he said out of the blue. But with you, it will be different. I asked him to what I owed the privilege. The winds favor you, Carlos replied with an enigmatic smile. Not satisfied with his answer, I insisted on knowing why I should merit the privilege. He would not answer me, replying evasively that one day we would discuss the subject. While browsing through some books, I suddenly felt Carlos grab me by the arm while pointing at a shelf. You see? You see? His face was the picture of indignation. I could not see anything. There, he exclaimed, indicating a cluster of books. I focused my eyes and saw his name on the cover of a book called A Separate Reality. The reason for his outburst appeared to be that the book had been classified as fiction. While we browsed through contemporary poetry, I said that I loved listening to stories about sorcerers and that I'd be delighted if he'd tell me some. On hearing my request, Carlos looked at me with shining eyes and an expression of sudden recollection. Then, in a dramatic tone, he whispered, I'm charging you with a task. He told me that he had a job to do for which he needed some information. But his busy schedule left him no time to look for it. Staring fixedly at me, he said, Maybe you could help me. I remember the intensity of his look, so powerful that I felt confused for a moment. But then he turned away from me and began examining the books on one of the shelves. The theme of the gaze is recurrent in Carlos's works. It is a technique with which a sorcerer stops the internal dialogue of another person instantly and forcibly. Once I had recovered from his look, I told Carlos I'd be very happy to help. His face lit up, and with a big smile he replied, Since you are going to be a journalist, he was referring to my studies, I'd like you to go to the world of the ancient seers and get them to tell their stories. A reportage of power. That's what I require from you. Carlos's request took me by surprise. I did not know what to make of it, and even began to think he might be joking. The sound of his voice was serious, but there was an air of mischief in his eyes. I tried to find out more about the supposed task, but Carlos said it was neither the time nor the place to discuss such matters. His answer filled me with curiosity to find out what he had in mind. On another occasion, while sitting with Carlos on a bench in Alameda Central Park, I took the opportunity to bring up the subject of my task. He said, What I'd like you to do is go to the world of the ancient seers and ask them a series of questions. I'll prepare a list later and give it to you. But you must take care, he went on, because they are wicked sorcerers, dark, and living in a permanent state of war, and they will try to kill you. To survive, you'll have to offer them something that interests them. Making them listen will be your only chance of escaping in one piece. And what can I offer them? I asked, trying to hide my fear. They are only interested in expanding their egos. They are so full of self-importance that they have focused all their evil deeds of sorcery on that particular goal. Entering worlds of a nature that makes them seek, at any cost, the type of energy that is most suitable for supporting their insatiable egos. To attract their interest, you must offer them something that inflates their self-importance to unimaginable levels. Something like a cult, which would be guaranteed to nourish it. You must convince them that they will gain more by letting you go than keeping your energy. Promise them a reportage in which they and their stories will play central part. If you succeed, you might come to an agreement with them. Why in the form of a cult? I asked. Is there no other way? Yes, Carlos replied. Letting yourself be caught. Those sorcerers have developed the morbid aspects of their personalities, such as the taste for ritual, fixations, devotion, and self-pity. Their character has a tendency towards what might be described as mystical. It is their desperate attempt to restore their unity. The only way to win their favor is to present them with edifices even more morbid than those they already worship, so that they see the momentary sacrifice of energy as an investment that will disproportionately enhance their future possibilities. Ritual and religious behavior is the only way to produce the amount of energy those aberrations require in order to achieve their dark goals. Carlos's words shook me. I was suddenly struck by deep terror, while at the same time my curiosity was aroused. In those days, my convictions oscillated between three different directions: my family's Christian beliefs, the school-learned scientific approach, which carried considerable weight, and also certain Oriental ideas that had begun to interest me greatly. Jokingly, I said that I didn't have the time machine I'd need to complete the task. Carlos patiently replied that I didn't need to travel through time to visit the ancient seers, since they existed today. Seeing my puzzled expression, he explained, calling seers new or old is just a way to distinguish between categories of sorcerers. Don Juan considered the new seers to be the ones engaged exclusively in the fight for freedom. The new seers stopped fiddling around with the fine points of tradition and went straight to the source. That doesn't mean that there aren't many sorcerers out there who still follow the old ways. You can learn a lot from them. In the world of sorcerers, nothing comes free. If you want tales of power, go for them. He pushed me gently, as if urging me to run down the street, then patted my shoulder and added, only those willing to take risks can unravel the hidden mysteries of the universe. I was very apprehensive, believing he was sending me on a macabre mission that could indeed involve evil sorcerers. We did not speak of my task for many years. I had, in fact, almost forgotten about it. It was only much later, during one of my recapitulation sessions, that I realized that Carlos had, on that occasion, pointed out a direction to me. It was the very moment when he presented me to intent. Provoking self-importance. My first contact with Carlos's work took place during the key period of my life, while I was still deliberating which concepts to adopt as the guiding ones in my life. When I first met him, I had already read some of his books, but many of the concepts they spoke about escaped me, whilst their meanings seemed to me obscure and provocative at the same time. Carlos's teaching style was unique. His glance alone could rouse a person's self-importance. Some people got so discombobulated in his presence that their ego would explode, and they would even become sick to their stomachs. I always had a good, friendly relationship with Carlos, although there were periods when we would not see each other or speak to each other at all. It was as if the Nawal wanted to give me a break, a period away from him long enough to give me the chance to absorb his lessons. Carlos strictly demanded that I keep total secrecy about our relationship, threatening to stop seeing me if I failed to meet that demand. His words were clear. Don't say anything to anyone about this. although at the time I did not understand the reason for this request. My retiring, solitary nature made it easy for me to comply, providing me with perfect isolation. In addition, Carlos demanded that I take systematic notes of our talks, declaring that one day those notes would prove useful to me. This surprised me, as on a number of occasions, in his lectures, I heard him say that one shouldn't write anything down. My academic training helped me greatly with that task. I remember how Carlos made fun of people, claiming that they were all hopeless egomaniacs who fell apart at the slightest pressure. Some people, he told me, were so hurt by his words that they would depart angrily and end up slandering him. It was fun to watch Carlos collapse with laughter as he repeated the barbarities they would say. He was particularly bothered by people who, in his opinion, distorted his teachings. He told us, for example, how a Mr. Sanchez shamelessly exploited Carlos's name, and had been organizing courses based on his books as far as the state of Hidalgo in order to profit. Carlos even hired lawyers to sue those who used his name improperly or quoted his writings without permission. He claimed that ideas were magical property of those who possessed them and ought to be respected. Carlos said we had to be grateful he was so patient and methodical when explaining the knowledge of the sorcerers. Had we been in Don Juan's hands, he said, he'd have been sure to put us in a sack and thrash us until we learned the lesson. That we simply had no time at all. I was curious about the way Carlos sometimes commented on other people's affairs in such detail that I wondered how he could know those things with such certainty. When I asked him if he had spies among his followers, he replied that although indeed many people informed him about what was going on, his certainty came from another direction. He said he was able to perceive the thoughts of others, and that the dreaming emissary told him everything about any person on whom he focused his attention. I asked Carlos if he knew my thoughts. Seeing my look of apprehension, he smiled and jokingly said that I was a soul in love. I blushed, like a child caught doing something illicit. Carlos also told me of people who would approach him so they could boast they knew a celebrity. They were easy to recognize, as the first thing they did was ask for his autograph. Others tried using their relationship with him to attract followers to their own schools. There were also those who came in the hope of being discovered and recognized by him as his successors. I would have fits of laughter watching him mimic their begging, doggy eyes, which said, "Here I am, please look at me." As if, when I failed to realize how wonderful they were, they'd get angry and go away, spreading slander not just about me, but about all of us, he said, referring to his cohorts. The only external help we can have. Once, as we discussed my possible commitment to the path, Carlos said, self-pity and self-importance are the real tyrants. They prevent people from seeing things clearly. Therefore, if you really want to do something for yourself, start fighting those enemies right now, today. But how can I do that? By being deliberate, staying alert, and being aware of every act, every thought and emotion that assaults you. By stalking yourself tirelessly and by not giving in to your vices. He went on. If you begin now, you will have taken your first big step. True, it could take you years of struggle, but at least you won't be inert. By my various vices, he meant the concessions we all make to ourselves when we say things like, I cannot live without that, or I'll allow myself the luxury of this, or our old excuse when we tell ourselves, I deserve this. To be aware of one's every thought, word, and action is undoubtedly a huge challenge, but I accepted it. He had been right. It took me years of work. For me, the process was gradual. When I finally realized that my actions were no longer based on self pity, I felt I had truly cast off a heavy burden. The most incredible thing, however, was that previously I did not even notice it was there. This task is really a 24-hour a day battle the warrior fights against himself, against his self importance and self pity, and is ultimately the battle against his own stupidity. To win it, one must force oneself at all times not to relax one's vigil and to sustain round the clock awareness. Since, if one lowers one's guard for a single moment, one loses protection against the onslaughts of the ego. Now, I understood what Carlos meant when he said that one had no need of teachers. He maintained that fighting self importance was like going to the toilet, something one had to do on one's own, since it was strictly personal business. The struggle was against one's own ego, and no one can help us with that. The only external help our peers can perhaps provide is to make us aware of our weaknesses. That, however, gives rise to a new problem. We often see those who warn us of our faults as adversaries or enemies, when in fact we should be grateful to them, for they are our benefactors. Beckoning Intent. In one of our chats, Carlos and I raised the topic of intent. I took the opportunity to ask him what it really was. He replied, It is not possible to speak about this topic, not because I wouldn't want to, but because any verbal representation one could come up with would be inadequate for the task. It's like eating ice cream. It must be experienced directly, and there's no way of describing it. Perhaps you could tell me then about the method of calling intent. I insisted. There are as many ways as there are practitioners. It seems to connect with every individual in a unique way. But sorcerers have discovered that yes, in fact, ways of beckoning intent do exist. How do they beckon intent? By being impeccable. But that's not saying much, is it? He looked at me, smiling ironically as if to say, I've already been there. Sorcerers are used to acting with complete detachment and generosity. This is one way of making oneself available to intent. The other is to move the eyes in order to communicate with the spirit. How do they move the eyes? Don Juan taught me many exercises, which I've already mentioned in my writings. Haven't you noticed? I did not know what he was talking about, so I asked him to give me an example. In my books, for example, I describe the methods of rolling the eyes to intend a change, squinting to intend non-ordinary perception, and half closing them to intend inner silence, and other things of similar kind. Once he's mastered every single one of these exercises, the warrior's eyes acquire a singular shine, a sensation that is difficult to describe and needs to be experienced personally. With that sensation, one beckons intent. Efficiency and efficacy. In the course of another conversation, I told Carlos that I had started a regime of rising at 5 o'clock in the morning, taking a cold shower, and then doing the exercises he had taught us. I thought Carlos would congratulate me on this achievement, but he did not welcome my news, saying that all I was doing was putting myself in danger of catching pneumonia. He added, "What you're doing is neither very efficient nor very effective. Forcing yourself in this fashion will achieve nothing, which means you're wearing yourself out to no purpose." I felt he was threatening my routines, so I tried to change the topic. I told him that the terms efficiency and efficacy, efficacy he had just used seemed redundant to me. He then explained that for sorcerers, it is important not to confuse the means with the ends. Superficially, the two concepts seem to refer to the same thing, but they don't. In practice, they are separated by an abyss, and the narrow passage across that abyss is the impeccability of the warrior's path. The warrior's path is an art of balance. Efficacy is the achievement of our aims. Efficiency, on the other hand, is the way of accomplishing that achievement while using the least possible amount of energy. For example, a shaman is efficacious when he succeeds in seeing energy, and he is efficient when that achievement does not waste his whole life, when he uses that power to increase his awareness rather than his self-importance. The ancient seers were very efficient at gathering power. However, they used the gifts they acquired to exercise control over others. When the moment of truth came, they remained caught as prisoners in the world of the inorganic beings, completely defenseless. They were very efficient, yes, but very inefficacious. Inefficacious. By learning to stalk, a warrior learns how to refine his level of efficiency. Every drop of energy counts. Every movement is decisive. The difference between the Toltec warrior artist and charlatan sorcerer of the streets is that for the former, the detail is of the utmost importance. The beauty of his art is revealed in every step he takes. For him, life is an exercise in strategy. While that other type of sorcerer becomes so seduced by the idea of efficacy, that is to say, by the attainment of his personal goals, that he throws himself at his objective like a fly at a glass window, and generally does not accomplish anything. His life is not a work of art. The efficiency of the warrior depends on the depth of his commitment to the path, but he must never allow himself to be confounded by understanding. He needs to be patient and accumulate power little by little, like a battery charging slowly. That is the only way he'll be able to resist the blinding effect of clarity. It is common for the apprentice to wonder why his benefactor takes so much time to teach him what he needs to know. Everything seems to be doled out drop by drop. That is so because the apprentice has not yet acquired patience. He doesn't know that a straight line is not always the shortest way. One handles efficiency by applying the art of stalking. When you've learned to plan every step whilst remaining sufficiently flexible to improvise in an instant, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Learning how to create strategies is of supreme importance on the warrior's path. At a certain stage of my path, I got obsessed with strategies to the point that I avoided interacting with people. "And how did you manage to overcome that?" I asked. I didn't do anything special. The changes happened by themselves. At a certain moment, I acquired a strange self-confidence. I felt I could do anything I set my mind on. The warrior's goal is to overcome the limits we impose on perception. To achieve this, he uses all the available techniques, enhancing each one by his own determination and creativity. Thus, our greatest achievement is not moving the assemblage point as such, since we do it inconsistently all the time. It is to anchor it in a new position through discipline. That is why I say that efficacy for a sorcerer means to achieve control of the dreaming body and then journey into that immensity out there. Sealed units of energy. Speaking about the luminous egg in one of our conversations, Carlos stated that we all were sealed units of energy. He had, however, previously said something that appeared to contradict that statement. He had said that self-importance drained our energy. At the appropriate moment, I asked him about it. "It's not a contradiction at all," he replied, smiling. "It's just another misunderstanding due to the inadequacy of our vocabulary. And if we throw the usual difficulty of using words and semantics to refer to energy phenomena into the bargain, you can get an idea of how complicated it can sometimes be to explain these topics. The fact is that our speech really lacks words capable of describing certain phenomena of sorcery. Because of that, poor interpretations occur. To try and avoid that problem, I have borrowed words from several languages and even created some new ones. But the situation is more serious than it appears to be, since the modern man believes that if one cannot express something in words, it doesn't exist. To make me see that not everything can be transmitted by means of language, he introduced me to a number of words that did not have a literal translation and required long explanations in order to clarify their meanings. As an example, he said that the Oriental concept of qi, when taken to mean energy, conveyed only part of its deeper meaning. Another example he mentioned was that in the English language, there was no intrinsic difference between the Spanish words ser and estar, as both concepts were expressed by the verb to be. He added that in some northern countries, there was no equivalent for the word passion, which meant that even if people felt that emotion, they were unable to express it. He said all that to make me realize how easy it was to get lost in the labyrinth of words and their meanings, which was the source of the confusion. He went on to say that at the moment of birth, all of us received a basic bequest of energy, which amounted to the sum of the passion our parents expended during our conception. That energy was encapsulated as part of the gift of life. It is all the capital we have. It is what we are. Now, what we make or don't make of it is the individual responsibility of each one of us. The process of being alive transforms our basic energy into a byproduct. Our perception, which generates experience stored as memory, together they produce the coveted self-awareness. The level of an individual's awareness can be measured in terms of his aptitude to be attentive to himself and to his environment. Attention is therefore the key element in the transformation and enhancement of gross energy into refined awareness. Growth of awareness is the sorcerer's goal. That is why they constantly exercise their attention. They deliberately design exercises in avoiding distraction. By doing that, they significantly increase their ability to concentrate. He remarked that he had found sculpting to be a very useful tool for cultivating attention. Through sculpting, he learned that when the internal dialogue is canceled, one gives the best of himself to the task at hand. How can awareness be enlarged? I asked. During our lifetime, each one of us develops our basic energy in different ways. Knowing the importance of looking after it, warriors save their energy and accumulate it through acts of impeccability. Their basic energy is to them like a seed that sleeps, dreaming dreams of abundance. In those dreams, it frees its tremendous potential and transforms into a luxuriant, fruit-bearing tree. By the same token, warriors know that their potential energy can likewise grow and expand beyond its limits. In theory, there is no limit to enhancement of awareness. It could keep on growing and growing, perhaps forever. To achieve this, all one needs is impeccability. That is the purpose of the sorcerer's continuous effort to be impeccable. They are fighting to become more aware. But watch out, because the energy can also be spent until nothing remains. Carlos explained that energy can be exhausted unconsciously, as it generally happens to people in the pitiless hands of the ego, who spend all their time firing off their emotions in interactions they maintain. Instead of spending their life dissipating their personal power in sterile relationships, sorcerers have discovered that it is possible to gather personal power through acts of sobriety and impeccability. They use the art of stalking to stalk themselves, not to deceive others. He said that with a touch of sarcasm, aware of my own feeble attempts in that direction, he went on. For seers, awareness has the appearance of a very bright, sticky, transparent elastic shell forming a cloak around the luminous egg. It is like an enveloping brilliance. Even though it should be abundant, that luminescence is almost absent in our species. That is so because awareness generated by the experience of being alive gets constantly obliterated by the quotidian, by our routines. That is the price the predatory universe charges for giving us life. As I gazed at him, hungry for more, Carlos continued. The universe charges us tax through flyers, the predatory aspect of cosmic energy. We are like chickens for them. They see us exactly as we see cattle, as a source of food. Just like we take advantage of other species, we are milked and eaten without compassion by the flyers. Do you ever wonder why people have emotional ups and downs, or difficulty remembering their dreams, and sometimes even the details of the previous day's events? That is the work of the predator, who extracts our very best from us. I asked him how much energy a person had left after being thus milked. He replied, "What we have seen is that the level of awareness in people generally doesn't grow above the height of the big toe. We can measure the energy level of a person by the amount of time they can keep their attention fixed. You can verify this yourself. Observe those around you, and you will see that hardly anybody manages to concentrate for any length of time. That's how fucked we are as a species. Even if someone does try to be more attentive, he can only manage to do so with difficulty, because the awareness accumulated by the process of being alive is constantly cut back by the flyers. Consequently, the sheen of awareness never gets to develop because the flyers do not let it. Our mind is actually the flyer advising us minute by minute to behave as imbeciles. That's why we spend our life wasting our energy on self-indulgence and useless outbursts of ego. Manages to stop the internal dialogue. This shouldn't be so difficult for an aware species like ours. However, the predator that consumes us leaves us only just enough awareness to keep us alive. And how do they consume us? I asked with a lump in my throat. Imitating the constrained tone of my voice, he replied jokingly, "They eat us with a knife and fork." He laughed heartily, and then added in a more serious tone, "They consume our energy whenever it is dissipated in the form of feelings and emotions." Any type of emotion? I asked. Sure. Emotions act as ejectors of energy, and there is always a flyer around, ready to take advantage. This goes for any type of emotion we generate, be it love, hate, repulsion, or tenderness. The intensity of the energy is frontally ejected out of the fibers of the luminous egg in the form of waves. The expelled energy is what the flyers consume. Using our ego as front in our interactions with the world forces us to carry on exhausting our energy. Whenever someone throws a tantrum, you can be sure that there is a flyer around to take advantage of such a waste. The same happens when strong emotions arise during sports competitions, or when we go to the movies or the theater, where the feelings of fear, anxiety, love, tenderness, and so on arise within us. Those emotions, too, attract the eaters. That's why sorcerers recommend investment instead of entertainment. We are really under crossfire. The society and the way we live are designed so that we can be constantly milked. Reacting to the world, we drain our luminous mass, our precious energy of self-awareness. Generally speaking, what is left barely suffices us to maintain our day-to-day life. That is why people live as they do. They are like automatons. They get up and go to work in order to sell the best time of their life to the highest bidder, in exchange for the means to go on living with the sole goal of being able to carry on working to produce more energy for the benefit of the third party. It really is a terrible, vicious circle, very hard to break. In answer to my question whether it was possible for an ordinary person to realize the truth about their situation, Carlos confirmed that it was theoretically possible to reach the condition of emotional indifference towards oneself through reasoning and coming to conclusions regarding our energy priorities. In practice, however, there is no way a person embroiled within the context of luminosity deterioration can react in time. One would never find sufficient energy. One would always be a step behind the necessary action, he pointed out. What can we do then? I mumbled. Since we are left to our own resources, we have only one option: to preserve the energy we were born with. Impeccable warriors don't need anyone to guide them, as saving energy becomes self-explanatory to those who are attempting to be more aware. Then the flyers do consume our basic energy? I inquired. I wanted to know if the flyers' predation irretrievably harmed our energy, or if we could reverse the process. He explained, in normal circumstances, the process of energy predation can definitively be reversed so that we can recover our full luminosity. That is possible because what the flyers consume is not the basic energy as such, but the energy processed and transformed into feelings and emotions. That is what gets ejected out of our energy mass when we fire our emotions off. The basic energy remains within us like the root of the tree of life. As I have already said, that energy is sealed. We remained silent for a few moments. My head was spinning. The implications of what Carlos was saying was astronomical. Anticipating my thoughts, he continued, energy is there to be used. It is like a fire whose flame, once ignited, can only be used or wasted. Impeccability means using the energy to generate more awareness. In that process, the warrior always chooses the path every step of which he enjoys, living intensely through every minute because he knows that the flame of life is not eternal. We are truly immersed in a world of mysteries, and the greatest of all pleasures is to unveil those mysteries one by one, like when one is a child and everything is new and vibrant. That is how saved energy enables us to make increasingly longer jumps each time until we end up taking off and flying. The possibilities for those that manage to save energy are truly extraordinary, and they can get to the point where their awareness increases to levels inconceivable to the average man. It is in fact possible to reach total awareness this way.